Hello, I hope you all are doing so well. Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to talk today a little bit about some things I've been seeing. Yesterday, obviously, I want to call it the Grand Conjunction. I keep seeing it as the Great Conjunction. I don't know what the difference is. Also, the solstice. This potent day, which everyone has been giving a lot of attention to. And, if you know me, if you know my work, I don't, it's not that I don't subscribe to astrology, right? But it's not the way through which I interpret energy. It's not the way that I make sense of the world around me. So while all of those things are probably very much true in some way, I have a challenging time relating any of that to what it means for me. And I just tend to see things in a different way. Doesn't mean one way is right and one way is wrong or anything. I just interpret the world around me very differently. And I think the reason I mention that is because, I did a video a while back, something along the lines of there may not be full disclosure, right? So what are we going to do when that happens? Again, always this sense that people are waiting for something, waiting for energy to shift, waiting for humanity to shift in response to the energy. And it's not necessarily going to happen in that way. This is an internal shift, which means that the energy is always available and present. And yet if we are not conscious to it, it's not going to make a damn bit of difference what the energy is doing or the bioavailability of the energy that's here. Which means that we have to know ourselves, we have to understand ourselves. And more than that, what we are really doing here is understanding the prison that we have been trapped in. Right? It's not that we don't know who we are, and it's not that we have forgotten who we are, or we don't know who we are as light beings. It's that we are that, and there is something that has been placed around that, on top of that. Right? And instead of operating from our full light capacity, we are constantly bombarded and reacting to the trauma that is in our field and in our reality. And then we create a response within our biology based on that stimulus. And these are the lives that we have been living. So what is very apparent to me about, and the energy has been building over the last few weeks, I understand distortion in the framework of the Dark Mother. I can relate to it. It's what makes sense to me. It's how I can see it coming through other people. And more than that, it's how it's showing up in my reality to show me what I need to know about what is in my own field. So Dark Mother to me represents the divine feminine distortion. But more than that, where does this Dark Mother come from, right? What is this energetic architecture? And I've always said the distortion comes through the maternal line. And that's really what we're talking about now. It's the architecture, it's the delivery vehicle through which we receive our distortion, through which we receive it's an architecture of dissonance, right, in our field, through which we create based upon then, which creates our distorted reality, which creates our traumatic experiences here. This is very much on the table now. And I've gotten a couple images around this, right? I've seen this, right? The way that I have unpacked it and started to understand it and kind of go after this energy is through the Dark Mother, right? This is the headmistress energy. This is the maleficent energy. This is the evil stepmother energy. And we all hold this to one degree or another, right? But more than that, we also all have our ancestral lineage. Through our maternal line, it's like this kind of sleeping beast energy. And it's going to play out in different patterns for each of us. But it all has this same component, which is that it comes through the female, it comes through the maternal line. And we have to dismantle and understand that relationship with our mothers in order to fully see this and release out of it, right? And again, there will be different layers to that. Over time, we'll think, okay, I've resolved this issue or resolved that issue, and then it comes up again in a different way, right? But at the core of it is to understand there is an energy there that we have to see and understand in order to remove ourselves from responding to it and thereby creating, again, this distorted trauma-based reality. Some of the images I get around this are like a rail line, right? So part of it looks like being on like a factory line or in some kind of meat processing plant, right? So it's like these big hooks where you're just stuck up here, you know, very much human, very much in your skin, very much you, but yet you are hooked and you don't have a choice or a decision about where you're going. You are just pushed along this path, and that's where you hang, right? Where you are is where you're hanging. Your feet are dangling, you're not on the ground. Something else is in control of you. The other image I get is, again, this idea of a rail, right? Like this, but like a train car, these box cars, right? Of just being headed for this very dark kind of destination. And not only that, but these cars themselves, you know, they very much evoke the energy of, you know, genocide, of packing people into these cars and sending them off into a concentration camp, that kind of energy, right? But it's not a concentration camp to die. It's a camp where you just live out all of eternity in hell. And can we face this fact that we have been living and existing in hell due to the distortion that we have in our ancestral lineages? Now, again, it doesn't mean that our specific ancestry has these beast or demonic energies, but it is an architecture that comes through the maternal line, right? So it's not saying that, oh, we come from this long line of awful women, but that energy is in each of our fields, right? So in many ways, it's like, but it is that. And when we try to separate from that, we have to be careful, because sometimes we can use that as a way of bypassing, but we do have to separate from it in order to see it more clearly, right? So can we admit that this is what has been going on and understand it fully for what it is, rather than saying, well, but it's my mother and I understand where she's coming from, and this is the way it's always been in my family, and I don't know what to do about it, and this is just what it is, because I know it's already, the script has been going on for years and years and years, and probably lifetimes and lifetimes. If I say this, they will say that. If I do that, they will do this. And it's this constant chess game, right? The moves, there's no creating any new moves. They've already been done and been repeated over and over and over and over and over again, right? Within this field, within this particular playing field, right? This chessboard. And so what we're doing now, what we are really feeling, essentially, as I am seeing it, it is this dragging down through the field. We know there is a greater availability of light now, right? This bioavailability, absolutely here. We can feel that. But what we're also feeling is this drag through the field. It's like a couple of things I've seen with it, right? It's like the toddler that's having a temper tantrum and you're trying to walk away and they're grabbing onto your ankle and you're like, but I have to go. So you keep going. It's like, we're still able to move forward, but it's very slow, right? It's like dragging, taking twice as long to do anything. Even though, again, we can feel this energy, right? We feel the lightness. We also feel the heaviness. And it's a bit of a vortex type energy, but it's a reverse vortex, right? It's one that collapses in on itself. So rather than feeling like it's expanding you, it's sucking you down. It's a bit like this quicksand in your field. So this is something I've been struggling with for several months now. And the reason it's come up so clearly for me, as I'm starting to study sacred relationship and to understand how that works, I'm starting to experience in a very visceral and tangible way how these energies work. When we start to move into communion with light, these energies flare. It's as if you can feel them start to move and come in. It's like the walls come alive and they start to close in on you. That's what this energy feels like, right? And there's different variations of this. It's not always going to feel like it's just closing in on you, but at times it does emotionally, right? It feels like I'm never going to get out of this. I don't know what it is, but I know every time I try to get up in the morning and to do something better and different, to save myself, to get myself out of this mess that I feel like I'm in, it doesn't do anything. I take all these steps, I make this plan, I take this action, I do the things I'm supposed to do, and yet it feels like I'm still stuck in the same place. This is this maternal distortion through the ancestry. And the other way it starts to look to me too is like these these roots, these trailing roots that grow on top of the ground, right? And they will just grow their little tendrils into wherever they can get in. That's also what this energy is like, right? Which we often call that kind of that narcissistic energy, right? However they can get into our fields, they're going to do it. They're going to test us, they're going to try, they're going to push our boundaries. These are just words we've started to use to describe a particular kind of energy, right? So what I have been experiencing is I am now moving forward, breaking out of these old energetic patterns. This energy comes on full force. And I started to notice this panic that would come up in me, and I would literally think in my head, I'm never getting out of this prison. I need to let go of this thing that has come into my life, even though I know it's the right thing for me. This energy is too overwhelming and it's too much. And I'm just going to have to live my life alone in my house, isolated. And that's just the way it's going to be. Because this energy is so insistent, right? It doesn't give up, and it's not going to give up. So the key is to start to really understand for each of us how this plays out in our own fields. Once we can see that play on our energy, that's really the key, right? Because we can spend years and years and years talking about it, going to therapy, analyzing it, but until we really understand what it's trying to do to us and the things that trigger it for us, it's really hard to do something different, right? Because people will say, well, just make a different choice, right? You can't keep doing the same thing over and over. If it's not working. And yet sometimes the choices we're making are correct. They are the right choice. The energy that comes in after making that choice or after taking that action is what actually stops us. It's the feeling that we start to have, right? So it's not that getting up and going to work out is a wrong choice. But if we feel overwhelmed with anxiety or whatever it might be, it's to recognize actually what we're doing is stepping out of that circle, out of that cycle, getting ourselves off of that factory line or off of that rail car line. And these energies will always come back in because their goal, this is their life force, right? Sucking on you, siphoning off of you. That's how they stay around. That's how they stay viable. That's how they have a purpose, is that we give those energies a purpose. Right? If we were to pull back from that, if we were to walk away from that, they wouldn't come after us. There's nothing to do there. Right? Because the goal is always to be self-sourcing. And so what I have noticed is that when I do take a stand, make a choice, make a decision, move in a certain direction, this comes from every corner. It comes from my kids, comes from my parents, comes from even clients sometimes, right? Community, whatever groups I'm involved in. Maybe not all at once, right? But from various different quadrants and sectors of my life, where I can no longer say it's that person and I need to stay away from that person because they're having a reaction, whatever. Because what happens inside of me, when I feel this energy start to rise, I start to feel guilty. I start to think, this is too much. I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, overburdened, and so I need to stop. So what's causing the overwhelm and the overburdening feeling? It's this over here. When I called this into my life, when this came into my life, this is when all of this overwhelm started to happen. So then I'm correlating the bad feelings with this good thing that came into my life, and I start to push that good thing away, right? When in fact what's happening is this good thing is supposed to be here. This is my work. This is how I'm moving forward in my light. But as the light comes in, these energies want to clamp down, right? Because God forbid I should free myself from this prison and go off and no longer be a food source. And that's essentially what happens. So the human mind, and not even the human mind, right? But within society, we have created all kinds of stories and narratives about codependency, about narcissism, about, family ancestry that actually serve to keep us stuck in these patterns. Right? And this idea, and my daughter rails against this, right? Blood is thicker than water. She's like, that's not even true. Well, maybe it is, right? But her concept is that, but your blood is replaced every so whatever, right? So it's not even the same blood like that you were born with. So how does that even tie you to your family? Which was interesting, that she even brought that up, and that it's such an annoyance for her when people say that. Because oftentimes we think, well, it is family, right? And family and loyalty and honor and all these kinds of things. And yet what we will find, our family relationships are often the most abusive relationships that we have. And for some reason, we have decided as a society that because we are born into those families, that means we have to honor and obey and uphold those relationships. And this isn't to say that we totally need to chop these things off, right? Or to not speak to people in our family or whatever it might be, these issues that we're having. But we do have a tendency to accept unacceptable behavior long after its expiration date. And we have a tendency to write these things off and say, well, it's my mother though, or it's my father, or it's my brother, or my sister, or my child, or my aunt, right? Like somehow that's a reason that these things should be allowed to continue. And yet our friends would never treat us like this. People who truly love us and see us and understand us for who we are as a being would never even think to treat us that way, right? And yet when it comes to family, it's just second nature. It's what we've always done. It's what has always been allowed. And so it is always what will perpetuate. So this time, not so much about energy coming into the planet to change humanity as to reveal within you where this is, because I've always said we are our own planetary body, right? Just as the Earth has its own atmosphere, so do we. And yet to understand the framework of our field has been this maternal distortion, the ancestral distortion, whatever we want to call it, right? It's almost like if we imagine ourselves as a sphere, right? And we see the grid work that would create that outer shell of this sphere. That's the energy that we are building based upon, right? So what I started to notice, and it's been so profound and it's come in so many different ways now, as I'm even driving along in the car and I see something and I have this drop in my heart. For me, I studied architecture for many years. So it's very near and dear to my heart. And yet when I see something being built and I always think, yeah, that's something I would have designed, or that's something, no, I hate that. Like that's the worst thing ever. How come they did that, right? But it triggers this thing in me, right, of like, and I never followed through on that, right? So there's this shame that starts to come over me, this guilt. And I start to think, why is this even a thing? Why is this even a thing? It's not unresolved emotions, unresolved issues. It's become a part of my language in my field that I unknowingly, subconsciously, unconsciously, whatever it might be, still reroute back to in my head. And so I've noticed, actually, what I have to do is start to tell myself a different story about architecture, about my experience with architecture, about what it means to me, what it meant to me, what it means to me now. And it's my choice, my ability, and my right to change that story, to rewrite it in a way that actually serves me. This is what it means to be a creator being. We can do this. We don't have to follow these narratives that have been passed down to us through society, through our ancestry, right? But what I have noticed beyond that is that there is this patterned emotional descending energy, this kind of, again, quicksand pulling down compression into my field, right? Where I pull into myself, I start to feel bad, I start to feel shame, I start to want to hide, I want to crawl into myself, I feel anxious, I feel unworthy, I shut down, I stop communicating. And the thoughts come. I'm going to be stuck alone in this prison for the rest of my life. I don't know what's wrong with me. I must be depressed. I must be bipolar. How is it that I was so happy 5 seconds ago and now I'm just this pile of mess? Hey, this is something that we all have. And can you start to recognize where these thoughts and feelings that you have about yourself have nothing to do with you, that have to do with this framework that is around your field? And it has been specifically designed to be this shell, this containment that keeps you from moving past that, from expanding your light fully. So every time we go to expand our light, chances are we bump into this, right? So the key is to not let that stop us. It's to figure out, okay, what was that response that I had? Because the response that you're having in your body, the emotion that comes up, is actually a sign that you have hit into something. And so it's very vital and it's important to recognize that emotion, right? This is where we don't want to dismiss. We don't want to sweep it under the rug. We don't want to say, okay, I'll feel better tomorrow. Because that's actually a key, right? And energies are invisible. Emotions are essentially invisible, except that we feel it through our body. This is why our bodies are so important, because they give us the keys to what's going on in our energy field, right? Otherwise, we can't see it. We can't really know it. So when we have that emotion, it's to say, okay, I've hit into something. What is it? Not chastise ourselves for having that emotion. The other thing I started to notice, and this was quite fascinating to me, I get along very well with my daughter. We have a wonderful relationship. And I started to notice there's been a shift in her energy. As I am connecting to these new things, suddenly she looks very crestfallen when I start talking about these new projects, these new directions I'm going. And I've been asking her, like, what is it? Is it every time this comes up that you're wanting more time with me, that you're starting to feel like you're being ignored, or you want to spend more time with me with this project? Like, what's going on here? And she's like, I don't know. But as I was getting ready the other day and I was thinking about her and thinking about her response, I realized when I see that look come over her face, I start to feel guilty. And I start to think, well, if this is affecting her like this, then I need to move away from this project, this person, this whatever it is that I'm doing that's causing this to happen in her, right? Because I don't want her to be in pain. And I want her to be happy. And whatever I'm doing is causing this, right? So I start to take on this guilt. And that was the moment that I realized, hold on a second. And there's a couple things to it, right? Which part of it is that if she's looking to me to be the person that is providing her with her life or her light or whatever it might be, right? If she sees me start to go in a different direction, that means there's less of me available to her. If she's building her whole world around me, of course that would make sense, right? That part of her life, her sustenance, her ability to survive in this world is getting taken away. Of course she's going to feel like that, right? So for all of us, the goal is to be self-sustaining, right? So she needs to have other things in her life where she's not just seeing me as the only thing that is keeping her going. Not that this is what's really happening, right? But that's a part of it. She's viewing me as being the source of something for her. So as I start to put my energy in other areas now, it's triggering her. So the answer is not for me to go back to her and give her what she needs. The answer is for her and for us together to start to build for her other things that sustain her, right? To spread and build her life force in a way that supports her. But yet my response was to feel guilty and to shut down and to pull back and to crawl into myself so that I could give to her what she needed. And so as we start to focus on sacred relationship and sacred partnership, this is what happens, right? And not just in our children, but in everyone that is involved in these families, in all of the lives that we touch through our relationships. People are going to start to feel us pulling away from these frameworks, these maternal lineages, the trauma fields, the trauma base that we have been building and creating on up until this point, right? So they're going to start to feel that pull away. And it may not even be something that they witness physically, right? But suddenly you just get a phone call like, hey, I've been thinking about you. Can you come do this for me? Whatever it is, right? It starts to happen. It's a bit unbelievable, but it's very, very real because we are moving away from these old frameworks and these old systems that were feeding the distortion and the matrix energies, whatever you want to call it. And so the answer is not to sink into ourselves and to shut down and continue going back into our old ways and our own patterns, right? It's to understand when we have those emotions, what am I actually responding to? Right? Where are the walls trying to close back in on me? And can I see this and understand it so that I can continue to move in the direction that I need to go? Right? Because this is where a lot of times we believe we're following our intuition, we believe we're following our impulse, and then somehow it doesn't work out. And it's not that we were wrong about our intuition and that impulse, right? As much as what happened was we started to feel the old framework, right? And the energies that the old framework creates, right? Because the old framework says, as long as you follow our rules and stay in this sphere, you will be protected and you will be safe. If you decide to move out, we're going to pull you back in because this is where it's safe, right? That's family trauma. It feels normal. And we define normal as safe, right? Even if it's not safe and it's not right. But it's habits and patterns, right? That's what we are as human beings. And yet we are not human beings. We are in a human body. We are light beings. We are spiritual beings. So it's time to move beyond that framework. But in moving beyond the framework, we also hit into the framework, and we're going to feel that. So this is where it's important to know who you are, to know your light, to know how to get back to your center, to get back to yourself, right? To constantly check in. Having this experience, having this emotion, I'm feeling triggered. What is really happening here? And that's how I'm seeing it, right? Yes, this grand conjunction is amazing. And yet, it's very much an internal process. It will always be an internal process until enough people start to come together to validate each of our own internal processes and say, oh, you're doing the same thing. Oh, this is like-mindedness, like energy, like creativity. We are birthing this knowledge of ourselves as light beings in our own bodies. We are the Christ consciousness. And Christ consciousness is not about something coming external to save us. Christ consciousness is about recognizing these emotions that you feel, any darkness that you are encountering, you can change that to inform your energy field of what's truly going on. Right? It's not that we've never been light beings here in these bodies. We are, we always have been. It's the constraints that have been more dominant, more predominant in our fields, right? And so this is the beauty, though. We can reprogram our mind. We are in control of this conscious brain. We can tell ourselves what to do. But we have to know what the brain has been doing improperly, what the cells have been doing improperly, right? To sabotage all of this before we can make a different or better choice around it. So this is where we have to face these uncomfortable feelings and to understand them in order to choose differently, right? And oftentimes, like I said, it's not about choosing differently, because our impulse is always generally correct. We want this, we desire this is what we think the world should be. Why isn't it that way? Well, there's all kinds of reasons it's not, right? So it's not to say that your heart is wrong. Your heart is generally always right. But what are you hitting into that's giving you a different message? And then you get kind of pulled off in that direction or distracted by that, right? Thinking you need to go solve this issue for that person, or when you solve this, you'll be able to come back to your place. No, often these energies are to pull you away from your own light and back into that framework, right? This is a machine. Keep that machine running. And as long as you believe that those emotions and those reactions are your reality, and that's kind of your compass system, and you're responding and reacting to that and using that to navigate your world, you're going to be in the wrong place. So ultimately, to know you have the answer, you're feeling the answers, how do you work with these messages that you're receiving? How do you interpret them properly? And to not think just because you feel something bad, it means this is all bad. I hope that was helpful. I'll leave this here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.